sister-in-law, threw soup in my face because I refused to pay for her vacation. I calmly left and stopped paying for everything, and now she is begging me on her knees. But Sunday dinner had become a routine. Me, my husband Jim, our son Mark, and his wife Brittany. I make a nice meal and try to keep things pleasant. But Brittany always had a way of making the evening about her. This night was no different. We were halfway through dinner when she began. "You know," she said, putting down her fork with a dramatic sigh, "Mark and I have been so overwhelmed lately. We really need to get away. Somewhere tropical, maybe. But the prices are just crazy." I continued to eat, hoping she'd go on. But she didn't. "The flights alone are outrageous," she continued. "I mean, it would be so nice if somebody could help us out. You know, just this once." I looked at her and then at Mark, who nodded as if her idea made perfect sense. "Brittany," I said, keeping my tone even, "we already help you with so much. A vacation isn't something we can justify." She didn't even blink. "But you could if you wanted to. It's not like you're struggling, is it? And Mark and I never ask for much." That made me laugh, but not because it was funny. "Brittany, who do you think pays your rent, your car insurance, and half the stuff you order online?" Her face darkened. "So you're saying no?" she said, her voice colder now. "I'm saying no," I confirmed. The table fell silent, except for the sound of Jim chewing softly. Brittany leaned back in her chair, looking at me as if I were the villain of the piece. Then, out of nowhere, she grabbed her soup bowl and threw it at me. Hot soup splashed all over my face, the heat stinging my skin. I was too shocked to move. Jim broke the silence, but instead of defending me, he looked at Brittany and said, "You didn't have to do that." Then he turned to me. "But Linda, you didn't have to be so difficult." Mark put his head down and said nothing. Brittany crossed her arms and smiled, looking like she just won something. I stood up, wiped my face with a napkin, and grabbed my bag. Without another word, I walked out. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window. I could still feel the sting of the hot soup on my face and the weight of Jim's words. "You didn't have to be so difficult." Difficult? After all I'd done for Mark and Brittany, I was difficult. For saying no to their endless demands? When Jim finally came downstairs, I didn't wait for him to start his usual small talk. "I'm done," I said, my voice firm. He blinked at me, halfway through pouring his coffee. "Done with what?" "Everything. I'm not paying her rent, groceries, car insurance, or any of her other bills anymore. Not a dime." "Linda, you can't just do that," he said, looking genuinely stunned. "Mark and Brittany depend on us. How are they going to make it without our help?" "They depend on me," I corrected him, staring at him. "And they'll figure it out. They're adults. It's time they started acting like it." He started to argue, but I cut him off. "Jim," she threw soup in my face. "And what did you do?" "You defended her. You called me difficult. If you're so concerned, you can pay for her out of your golf budget." That shut him up. That night I called Mark to tell him my decision. When he picked up, I didn't give him a chance to ease into the conversation. "Mark," I said, "this is just a heads up. Starting next month, your father and I will no longer be paying your rent or any of your other expenses. It's time for you and Brittany to be on your own." "What?" he stuttered. "Mom, you can't just dash." "I can't," I interrupted. "And I am. You're married now, Mark. You have responsibilities. It's not my job to finance your life." There was a long pause, and for a second I thought he might apologize, or at least acknowledge how out of hand things had gotten. But instead he said, "Brittany's not going to like this." "She doesn't have to," I replied. "Goodbye, Mark." And I hung up. I spent the rest of the evening feeling a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and an odd sense of relief. For the first time in years, I put my foot down. But I knew Brittany wouldn't take it lying down. Sure enough, a week later there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, there she was, standing on the porch with red-rimmed eyes and a forced smile. "Hi, Linda," she said sweetly, as if the soup incident had never happened. "Can we talk?" I stood there for a moment, staring at Brittany on my porch. Her tone was sugary sweet, but her eyes had a slight edge to them, as if she wasn't used to groveling and wasn't happy about having to do it. "Can we talk inside?" she asked, looking over her shoulder as if she didn't want anyone to see her standing there. I stepped aside without saying a word and she walked in, her heels clicking on the floor. She looked around as if hoping for Jim to back her up, but he wasn't home. "Linda, I just wanted to apologize," she started, but it felt rehearsed. "Things got a little heated at dinner the other night, and I overreacted." I crossed my arms. "Overreacted? You threw soup in my face, Brittany." She winced, then quickly recovered. "I know, and I feel terrible about it. That's why I'm here. I wanted to make things right." "Making things right would start with an apology," I said, raising an eyebrow. She hesitated, her cheeks flushing. "I just said I feel terrible," she said, her tone bordering on defensive. "But you have to understand, Linda, I was under so much stress. And when you said no to the vacation, well, I snapped. You know how hard it was for me. I couldn't believe it." Even now she was trying to make herself the victim. "Brittany," I said slowly, "you don't seem to understand what you've done. For years I've bent over backwards to support you and Mark. Rent, groceries, bills, things the two of you should have been handling on your own. And the moment I set a limit, you threw a tantrum like a child." Her face hardened, but then quickly softened, her voice dropping to a pleading tone. "Linda, please don't stop helping us. We need you. Mark's job barely covers the basics, and with everything going up in price." "That's not my problem," I said firmly. "You and Mark chose to get married. You chose this life. It's not my responsibility to finance it." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a second I thought she might actually break down. Instead, she knelt on the floor, her hands clasped in front of her as if begging. "Please, Linda," she said, her voice breaking. "We're going to lose the apartment without your help. Just until we get back on our feet, I swear." It was a pathetic sight, and despite my anger, I felt a twinge of compassion. But I didn't show it. "I'll think about it," I finally said. "But things will never be the same. If I decide to help, it will be on my terms." She nodded quickly, as if she'd take anything at this point. But as she stood and smoothed her dress, I noticed something. She hadn't really apologized, not for the soup, not for the years of entitlement, not for any of it. When she left, I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the empty space across from me. Part of me wanted to believe she'd finally learned her lesson. But deep down, I knew Brittany too well. This wasn't over. After Brittany's visit, I knew I couldn't let things go back to the way they were. The next day I called Mark. "Mark," I said, "I've decided I'm willing to help with the shopping for 3 months. After that, you and Brittany are on your own. I won't be paying rent or anything else." There was a long pause before he finally said, "Okay, but Brittany's not going to be happy." "She hasn't apologized to me yet," I replied, "so I'm not going to discuss it with her directly." He mumbled something and hung up. I heard nothing from them for a while, which only made me more suspicious. A week later, Jim came home and told me that Mark and Brittany had invited us over for dinner. "They want to make amends," he said. "Amends?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "We'll see about that." When we arrived at their place, everything was set up perfectly: candles, a spotless apartment, and a very cheerful Brittany. Dinner started well, but it didn't take long for Mark to join in. "Mom," he said, "we really appreciate everything you've done for us. But we were hoping you'd reconsider helping us with the rent, just for a few more months." "No," I said simply. "My decision hasn't changed." Brittany's smile stiffened. "But that's not enough, Linda. You're leaving us with no options." "You have options," I replied. "You're both adults. It's time to figure it out." She glared at me, her fake sweetness slipping away for a moment. The rest of the dinner was tense, and as Jim and I drove home, he finally said, "Maybe you were too hard on her." I didn't even look at him. "Then help them," I said. "But I'm done." And that's when I realized that the rift between Jim and I was deeper than I had admitted. The days after that dinner were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. Mark and Brittany didn't call, and Jim avoided the subject entirely. I knew the silence wouldn't last. Sure enough, Jim came home one night and dropped a bombshell. "I've been thinking," he began, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "Maybe we should pay the rent for a little while longer, just until they find a new place." I stared at him, the calm I'd been holding on to slipping away. "Jim, are you serious? After everything that's happened? After what she did?" "They're struggling," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "What kind of parents just leave their kids hanging?" "They're not kids, Jim," I snapped. "And this isn't about helping them. This is about enabling them. I've been the one paying for everything while you sat back and let me do it. Now that I've said no, you want to swoop in and play hero?" His face darkened. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I repeated. "Fair was me paying her expenses for years without a single thank you. Fair was me walking out of that dinner covered in soup while you defended Brittany. And now you think I'm the bad guy?" We argued in circles for the better part of an hour. Jim couldn't or wouldn't see my side. By the end, I was exhausted and fed up. "I can't do this anymore, Jim," I finally said. "Not with them. Not with you. If you want to keep supporting Mark and Brittany, go ahead. But don't expect me to stick around and watch." "What are you saying?" he asked in a low voice. "I'm saying I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, heavier than I'd expected. Jim looked stunned, but I felt nothing but relief. This had been building for years, and now it was finally out. He tried to talk me out of it, but I'd already made up my mind. For too long I'd put everyone else's needs before my own. It was time to put myself first. As I packed a bag and prepared to stay with a friend for a while, Jim sat quietly in the living room. For the first time, I saw the cracks in the life I'd been holding together. But instead of feeling sad, I felt free. After I left, I moved into a small rental about an hour away. It wasn't much, a small one-bedroom with dated cabinets and creaky floors, but it was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Jim and I hadn't talked much since I'd left, and I hadn't heard a peep from Mark or Brittany. I assumed they'd gotten the message. Then one afternoon my phone buzzed. It was Brittany. I almost didn't answer it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" "Hi, Linda," she said, her voice strangely soft. "I was wondering if we could get together. I have something I'd like to talk to you about." I hesitated. "What is it, Brittany?" "It's hard to explain over the phone," she said quickly. "But I promise it's important." I sighed, torn between shutting her down and hearing her out. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her the next day at a coffee shop near my apartment. When she arrived, she looked different, less polished than usual, almost nervous. She ordered coffee, sat across from me, and started talking before I could even get comfortable. "Linda, first of all, I want to thank you for meeting me," she began. "I know things have been tense between us." "That's one way to put it," I said dryly. She smiled awkwardly and continued. "I've been thinking a lot. About how I've treated you, about how Mark and I have handled things. And I want to say, I'm sorry." I raised an eyebrow. "You're sorry?" "Yes," she said, nodding. "I realize now that we took advantage of your generosity. And I don't blame you for cutting us off. I probably would have done the same in your place." Her words sounded sincere, but I knew Brittany well enough to be cautious. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. She took a deep breath. "I've come to ask you for one last favor. After this, I promise you'll never hear me ask for anything again." I crossed my arms. "And what would that be?" She looked out the window and hesitated. "A car," she said finally. I blinked. "A car?" "Yes," she said quickly, her words tumbling out. Mark and I have been trying to make ends meet, but our car broke down last week. We can't afford to fix it, let alone buy a new one. And without a car, it's going to be impossible for me to get to work, for Mark to get to job interviews. This is the last thing we'll ever ask for, Linda. I swear. I stared at her, trying to process what I had just heard. After everything, she had the audacity to ask for a car? Brittany, I said slowly, do you realize how that sounds? You're sitting here telling me you're sorry for taking advantage of me, and then you ask for something else. I know how it sounds, she said, looking genuinely confused. But I mean it, this is the last thing. If you do this for us, I'll never ask for anything again. I'll even sign something if you want me to. I didn't say anything for a long time, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Finally I sighed. I'll think about it, I said. Her face lit up. Thank you, Linda. You have no idea how much that means. As she left, I sat staring at my coffee, wondering if I'd just been played again or if, for once, Brittany was actually being honest. For days, I struggled with Brittany's request. A car was a big ask, and part of me wanted to say no. But I thought of Mark. He wasn't innocent in all of this, but I knew he would struggle without reliable transportation. In the end, I called Brittany and told her to meet me. When we sat down, I got right to the point. I've decided to help, I said. But here's the deal, it'll be a used car, in my name, and you'll take care of the insurance and maintenance. If you miss payments or neglect it, I will take it back. This isn't a gift, it's a chance to get back on your feet. And it's the last thing you'll ever get from me. She nodded quickly, agreeing to everything. A week later, she and Mark had a modest used sedan. As I handed her the keys, I looked her in the eye and said, "Don't make me regret this." She promised not to, but as I drove home, I couldn't help but wonder if I had just opened the door to more of the same. A few weeks went by after I helped Brittany and Mark get their car, and things were strangely quiet. Too quiet. No updates, no thank yous, nothing. It wasn't like Brittany to stay silent for long, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then, out of the blue, I got a message from an old neighbor who lived near her apartment. "Hey, Linda," the message said. "I just saw Brittany driving a shiny new SUV. I guess things are looking up for her. Thought you'd like to know." I read the message twice, convinced I had misunderstood. A new SUV? After all, where in the world did they get the money for that? Curiosity got the better of me. The next morning, I decided to drive by their apartment to see for myself. When I pulled up, there it was, a spotless, brand new SUV parked right out front. It gleamed in the sunlight, almost mocking me. I looked around for the modest used car I'd just helped them buy, but it wasn't there. My stomach sank. Later that day, I texted Mark. "Where's that car I helped you get?" I asked bluntly. His reply came quickly. "We traded it in for the SUV. Brittany got a great deal. Don't worry, the payments are manageable." I stared at the message, stunned. Traded it in? After all the pleading about how much they needed help? For a moment, I couldn't decide whether to laugh or scream. Brittany had promised that this was the last thing she'd ever ask for. But now it seemed she'd already twisted my help into something else entirely, just as I'd feared.